Welcome to the Thursday, October 24th edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Clemson football getting ready for Saturday night's game against Boston College. Man, it is time to step up, or for Florida State, Miami, somebody else in the ACC to step up so we could actually have like a noon or 3:30 instead of a 7:30. Makes perfect sense why the ACC network would want to make a showcase of Clemson, the only breadwinner in football so far and for the foreseeable future. Big week for Paul Strelo, big couple of days. Basketball recruiting, huge commitments. 2 4-stars for Brad Brownell and crew. Congrats to them for that. Also some Thursday insider notes from Paul that were posted earlier this morning. And then putting the finishing touches on the weekly video review segment that'll be posted on TigerIllustrated.com about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Our title sponsor of the Dubcast from way back in the beginning, August of 2018, Parham Smith & Archenhole Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Blake Smith, a good friend of mine, he's been representing plaintiffs in medical negligence and other personal injury cases for over 15 years. Blake serves on the advisory board for the paralegal program at Greenville Technical College. He recently completed his 10th year as an adjunct pro bono professor at Clemson University, where he teaches sports law. Blake was also featured in a recent Consumer Reports heart surgery risk article. In other words, Blake and everybody else at Parham Smith & Archenhole know what the heck they're doing. Free consultations, 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. Our newest podcast sponsor, been with us for a few months now, Blackacre Law Firm, sister law firm of Parham Smith & Archenhole in Greenville. Stuart James is a 1998 Clemson grad, big Clemson fan, just like the Parham Smith & Archenhole family. Blackacre gives you the representation you can depend on when you're on the home stretch, closing on your house, all those documents you're signing, all those technical aspects of it. The last thing you want is for something to go wrong at that point. Blackacre also provides services for wills, powers of attorney, durable, and healthcare. Don't put yourself and your family in a bad situation by not having these important documents. Call today for a consultation, 864-775-5400, or go to their website, blackacrelawfirm.com. That's BLACKACRE lawfirm.com. All right, this week's interview guest, Byron Doc Harder. Man, he's been on my list for a long time. Glad we finally got to sit down with him. He's been at Clemson since 1972. Head physician for a number of the Clemson athletics programs for a lot of those years. Also been a vital member of the community and a lot of philanthropic efforts of he and his wife, Mickey Harder. A lot of fun to sit down and talk to. A lot of great stories. This was a treat. So here we go. Enjoy. Okay, joined by Dr. Byron Harder. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Glad to do it.
How's retirement?
Lovely. We sold our big house and moved out to Patrick Square, which is a really nice multi-generational community, and we love it out there. Got a lot of new friends, and as well as a lot of old ones that are out there. So we are very, very pleased that we made that move.
I'm guessing you're still keeping yourself busy, even though you're quote-unquote retired.
Well, I find things to do. I maintain our churchyard and mow the grass and do all that kind of stuff and try to keep it looking nice, and go down to the beach every once in a while. We have a little place at Edisto to try to catch some fish or shrimp or something like that, crab meat, something like that. But I find things to do.
And you still maintain a presence with athletics, I think, in the form of you administer the physicals. Is that right?
Well, basically, I'm technically on the payroll for $100 a month, but just so they pay my license fees and things like that, and I back up at certain times and do things. Help Lynn with physicals when they kind of get overwhelming a little bit, and I missed that this year as I was sick, but I enjoyed that. And a couple of things, like when Trevor got hurt last year, I sat in the training room with him the second half just to make sure everything was okay. Just basically, I go down there to listen to Dabo's talks and interact with the other doctors.
What is this like for you? And we'll get into your history here in a few minutes, but what is this like for you to see football at such a level that probably no one on the planet except maybe the head coach envisioned 5 or 6 years ago?
It's certainly a wonderful time for Clemson, and we have a wonderful head coach. He You probably heard this, but when he was being considered to be the coach, I wrote Jim Barker and Terry Don Phillips and told them that I said, I'm no judge of football coaching talent, but I said, as far as a person, you won't find a better person to represent Clemson. He will never embarrass us, and he'll do a good job leading these young men in the right paths and everything. So, but as it turned out, he's a good coach too.
Yeah. That's interesting. Just thinking back to, those days when he was auditioning to be the head coach, and he made such a good pitch for himself to I guess a number of people, including the board of trustees. The now famous response when one of the board members asked him, said something to the effect of, "We want to be more like Michigan and Georgia," and he says, "No, I don't want to be like them. I want them to be like us." And so I'm curious. That's a long-winded way of asking you, trying to explore what you saw in him when you were observing him as a receivers coach.
He was honest with these players. There were occasions when he made a talk to them, even though he wasn't the head coach, and you could tell that he had what I told my son Bill was the it factor. He just knew what to say at appropriate times, and he was trying to make sure that they understood that they had to represent Clemson well and be good citizens, as well as, and this was while he was an assistant, so I knew that it was going to continue when he got to be a head coach.
You said he addressed the team at some points during that time?
Well, yeah, he did. And, of course, sometimes it was just part of the team, the ones he was responsible for, but I was lucky enough to hear several of those. And then a couple of times, I don't remember the exact reason why, but he addressed the whole team, and he you could just tell he was a special person.
Visited with Jim Barker recently, and he shared that his first encounter with Dabo was on the first day, the day that Dabo was hired as a receivers coach back in 2003, I guess March of 2003 or something, and that Barker just happened to be in Alabama at a speaking engagement for, I guess, IPTAY or something in that realm, and Dabo was still in Alabama. He had yet to come here, even though he had been hired, and I think Tommy Bowden called Dabo and said, "Hey, it might be a good idea for you to go to this meeting and introduce yourself to the fans and President Barker." And he did.
I didn't know that. That's a good story.
Yeah, and Jim, as Jim recalled, he said he was instantly just it struck him right away that Dabo was just a different person and that he was a Clemson person, even just on a mere introduction. So I'm just curious when your first interaction with him was, and when maybe that struck you.
Well, one of the first times was his children went to the Episcopal Day School, and I maintained the Episcopal churchyard, and I'd be up there working in the yard, and one time Dabo was picking up one of the boys, and he made the boy come over there and tell me how much they appreciated the job I was doing. And, most people wouldn't do that. And you knew right away that there was something special about that family. And his wife did the same thing. They were just good people.
President Barker also said within the first few months of Dabo being here as the receivers coach that he and Marcia were at the Hendricks Center getting ice cream. And then they look, and in front of them in line is Dabo and his family in the Hendricks Center, which he said you never would see an assistant coach over there mingling with the students. And so sort of just a different personality, I guess, is willing to sort of...
He wanted to be part of the community and do the things that other people in the community did, and he wanted his children to experience a lot of things that make this a special place, I think.
So you got here, was it 73?
72.
72.
No, yeah, 72. 72.
Okay. Tell the story of what brought you here. And
Well, I was in Vietnam, and my last year in the service, and my wife met me in Hawaii for R&R. There were two groups in my hometown of Sumter that wanted me to go into practice with them when I got out of the Army. And I didn't know enough about either one to make a decision. And she said that a friend of ours that was working at the Student Health Center said that one of the doctors had died, and they wanted to know if I would be interested in coming and trying that kind of work for a year. And my wife said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, let's do that. So we came here with the intention of staying 1 year. And it just so happened that she got a job in the music department that was temporary, but it turned into a permanent job. And we got pregnant with our second child, and just looked around one day and said, this is a good place to raise children, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to stay here.
And then from that point until, I guess, was it 81 that was your first season as the football team's team physician?
No, Dr. Hare and I were pretty much sharing it by that time.
Okay.
And, we'd alternate practices and this kind of stuff, but we were pretty much both at all games. And occasionally, like when we went to the Independence Bowl, he went with them and I went to Hawaii with the basketball team, which turned out to be a good move. But anyway, Dr. Hare worked pretty much for the athletic department for a couple of years, which helped his retirement. And then they asked me to come work there, and when he retired, so then I went, and I don't even remember exactly which year that was, but it was after 81.
So you were around during the transformation. I mean, I guess a casual fan or whatever just thinks back to 81 national championship, but there was a transformation, I guess, after 76 and all that, when they started recruiting at a higher level, and Charlie Pell comes to town and they start winning at a level they hadn't really before. What are your recollections from that? Because I guess the 75 season was not good, ended poorly, and then things start changing. What do you recall from that transformation?
Well, I'm not much of an interactor with the coaches. Of necessity, I had to tell them some things and talk to them about medical issues on time to time. But I just remember the players more than the coaches, and because I was, on a more intimate basis with them, and it was evident that we were getting a better class of athlete, and that we were going to be successful, or more successful than we had been under the previous coaches.
And I guess even though you were closer to the players than the coaches, being in the locker room for a lot of those pre-games and halftime and post-games, what I guess we'll start. I want to hear about a lot through the history, but starting with that time, from Pell to Danny Ford, what are some of your recollections of those moments?
Well, every coach is different, the way they talk to the players and the way they interacted with them. And I was, the first few years I was here with Parker and Hootie and those guys, I was pretty much a rookie and kind of in awe of the whole process and everything. So my recollections aren't too much from that era, but it just was a way of each coach had a way of dealing with the players that was different, and dealing with me was different. Some wanted to talk to me, some wanted to only go through the trainer. It's just everybody had a different idea about how to run things and how to do it, and I just went along with the flow, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Can we explore that, like the role of the medical side? Sometimes can conflict with the interest of what the coach wants, as far as and how that's evolved, I guess, maybe through the years.
Usually it was over things like concussions, number one. I'll be a little self-aggrandizing here and say that I was a little ahead of the curve on concussions, because I think I was much more conservative with them than was the norm at that time, because I was always getting fussed at by the coaches because they said, well, it was just a little dinger. He's all right now. He says he's all right. And I'd still hold him. And, that kind of a conflict is to be expected. When I went to work full-time for the athletic department, the first thing I asked Bobby Robinson when he asked me to take that job, was to say that I've got to have control, and you've got to back me up when I make a medical decision. And he said, I certainly will, and there will be no problem. So that kind of solved things. And over the years, a couple of people that I actually made quit playing football because of concussions have come back and told me how grateful they were, although they were pretty mad at me at the time, how grateful they were that I made them stop, because they've read all this stuff about the traumatic brain injuries and the cumulative effect of concussions, and we just know a lot more about it now than they did. But it was just a hunch, kind of, that was a pretty serious thing to take into account.
A hunch.
And of course, some coaches said, well, he says he can play, and I said, well, when he's completely free of every symptom and it's been several days, then he can play. But I said, we just have to put your foot down sometime.
Was this the 80s, just to the time frame?
Yeah, it was, all the time I worked, I was pretty aware of the concussion problems, and, I kept telling the players, you only get one brain to deal with, and you don't want to kill any more cells than you have to and have trouble in the future. I never dreamed that it was going to turn out to be such a big deal with the traumatic injury syndrome that they have, but it certainly has, and everybody's a lot more conscious of it. And we didn't have the electronic test and everything that they do now to measure their function and all. It was just a hunch type thing.
You said a few players have thanked you. Can you disclose who it was, or?
Well, I'd rather not. They have, but they that's these days of worrying about telling people things for medical issues that you shouldn't. I don't know. I don't think I should name them, but they're very grateful that I did make them quit.
Obviously this is a prominent issue now with CTE and all that, and there's a feeling from one faction that the game is more dangerous now than ever because players are bigger and faster, and the schematics of the game is more of a space game, so they have more of a run and start before these collisions. And I'm curious to get your thoughts. I mean, my feeling is that it's still a dangerous game, but it's probably safer than it's ever been. But back in the 80s, like you said, there was not that awareness, and there's 3-a-days, and there's all this pounding, just relentless pounding. And if a player gets knocked out, he takes a play off and then goes back in. I'm just curious for your thoughts on this debate as it stands now.
The dramatic thing since the time I first walked in the training room in the 70s and now is the size of the players, and the way they come so much more physically mature than they used to be. They're just big and faster, and of course the laws of physics say that when those big fast people run together, it's going to be a lot worse than slow people, small people run together. So it's changed a lot, and I think that is why concussions are more serious and everything now, because they just get more of them. By the time I retired, we were having more and more trouble with concussions, and it was just because they were bigger and stronger.
So what do you think about what is your opinion on whether it is more dangerous now than ever, or maybe not so much?
Well, helmets have improved, and a little bit more protection there. And of course, the rules have changed a lot, and when I first came here, coaches told people to put their head down and stick it in the chest and all this, that, and other. And, of course, you worried about neck injuries and as well as concussion a lot more than you do now, since the rules have been changed, and it's all for the better as far as I'm concerned.
You mentioned you had a sort of an educated hunch back when it wasn't common to be concerned about concussions.
Well, it was a little bit of it was from personal experience. I was in a wreck on the way home my junior year of Clemson and was unconscious for 23 hours.
Wow.
And that was before they had CAT scans and MRIs and everything. They just had to kind of wait and see if I was going to wake up. And that whole summer I had trouble with headaches and walking up and down stairs and everything. It was just an awful experience. And that probably influenced my thinking a good bit.
Where was the wreck?
Yes, car wreck.
Where was it?
Oh, in between Columbia and Sumter.
Okay.
The guy that was driving went to sleep and ran off the road.
And so what was you mentioned that was your hunch, but I'm curious the general take back then from the medical community or team physicians.
There wasn't nearly as much talk about it. You'd go to sports medicine meetings and all, and it was mostly, about learning how to repair ACLs and this kind of stuff, and very little talk in the early days about concussive injuries. And fortunately, that's changed, and everybody is doing research and trying to find the best ways to make the helmets more safe, and to avoid as much trauma as they can by changing the rules. And everybody's in favor of that now, so it's a lot different. A great friend of the Clemson Dubcast and winner of the Clemson Area Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year Award, Founders Federal Credit Union. If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers, and all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Membership at Founders has many benefits: great rates on loans and savings products, advice on investments and insurance products, and even a Clemson debit card available for any Founders member with a checking account. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the NCUA. If you're in Clemson, stop by and see Matt and his staff at 680 Old Greenville Highway, Suite 300, right next to the Walmart Neighborhood Market. Quick word about Uptown Realty LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid 130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com. What was so like in, say, 1985, during a practice or a game, a player gets his bell rung, for lack of a better term. I guess that's the terminology of the day. Is the protocol, the general protocol, okay, give him some smelling salts and then send him back in when he's ready? My rule generally was, as far as I was concerned, a headache indicated that the brain was still swollen. And as long as they had a headache, there was absolutely no question they couldn't play. And I told them how honest they had to be. There's something called a second impact syndrome. If you get another injury while your brain is still swollen, it's much more serious than if it had cleared up. So explain all that to them and tell them why you're holding them, even though they feel like they can go back. And they kind of grasped that, and that you were trying to do the best you could for them. And that's just the way it was. We had to do that and try to protect the players as best we could. And I think it's a lot better now, because they have these ways to measure function and memory and things like that we didn't have. We just had a kind of a gut feeling about it.
I think back to the national championship in Tampa 3 years ago. And Mike Williams got his bell rung in that game, got hit really hard. And as I recall, he was doing his best to avoid the trainers. And I'm just curious how hard it is to know when a player is being truthful, because it's that, they're in the heat of battle and they want to keep going, especially in a...
Well, it's hard, and that's why you had to emphasize to them, because they want to play and they're competitive, and they don't think long range. They're just thinking about getting back in there, and that's why you have to explain to them the dangers and the risk. Now, we know a lot more about concussions, and the players know a lot more about them. So I think they're much more agreeable these days than they were in the past. And that's the experience I get that's the feeling I get from the experience of the doctors that took my place.
I know there's a couple of years ago, Terry Allen was back here, and we sat with him and interviewed him for a while, and he said that he disclosed that he was having problems with his memory. Like he would have to, his wife would have to drive home from dinner or something because he didn't remember the way.
Who was this? I didn't.
Terry Allen, the former running back. Is it hard to hear stories like that from those from that area because you just didn't know?
Yeah, it's real hard, and it's hard to see not only from head injuries but from other injuries of people having trouble walking and having replaced their knees, joints, and this, that, and other. And it's a brutal game, and they pay a price. Just for instance, my son in his basketball career had several knee operations, and even after he finished school, basketball in church leagues and all, he re-injured it several times, and he's thinking about getting knee replacements and things because it's a cumulative effect on it, and it's limited him in a good bit, a good many ways. And the head injuries is obviously a lot worse than that because they can't be fixed.
As we think long term about football's existence, I'm just curious if you think there's a way for football and safety in terms of head injuries to coexist long term, and the game to retain the shape as we know it.
I think it's going to change.
Yeah.
I think the whole game of football in the long term is at risk, the whole sport of football, because parents know more about head injuries and the future that holds for their children and things like that. And it's just a lot of people won't let the children play football to start off with because they are worried about head injuries and this. That's one reason I think a lot of athletes would be very good at football have gone to other sports simply because the risk is a lot less, and the parents encourage that, and that's just the way it is.
A lot more soccer players now, it seems like, youth sports and things like that.
Right, lacrosse, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Curious, one of the unforgettable stories, I'm sure, from your career is that of Brandon Streeter when he had separated his shoulder. I'm sorry, I might be getting this wrong. He broke his collarbone?
No, Brandon had several bad injuries. He had a fracture dislocation of his ankle in the practice one time. Then he had a dislocated hip down at Georgia Tech that was quite an experience trying to get that back into place. They ended up having to put him to sleep to get it back into place. But Mrs. Streeter wanted to come in the locker room when we were trying to put it back in place. I said, Miss Streeter, you don't want to be there.
Wow.
So she fortunately didn't go in there because it's a very stressful and painful procedure trying to get it back in. And like I said, he ended up having to go have anesthesia to get it back in place. But he's a tough guy. He's one of the toughest players we've ever had.
Can you take me inside that room at Georgia Tech and tell the average person what that?
Well, we had two doctors, me and Dr. Bowman, and two trainers tugging and pulling and putting our weight and everything else into it, trying to get the hip back in the joint. And of course, Brandon was not enjoying that, and it was pretty loud, and it just, but he understood we had the quicker you can get something back into place, the better you recover from it. And unfortunately, we couldn't get it back in, and like I said, he had to go to the hospital and be put to sleep to have it reduced.
Didn't he have some other injuries too? Or was it?
Oh, I'm sure he did. Those are the two I remember the most. The one, the dislocated ankle. I mean, you know, when you look down and his ankle's pretty much at right angles from the leg, and he sees that. He's not too happy, but fortunately we were able to reduce that immediately on the field, and that he came back a lot quicker, I think, than if we hadn't been able to do that.
Toughest player you've ever been around? See the toughest player you've ever been around?
We had a little return guy. Oh my goodness, what's his name? I want to say Jack Williams or something like that. I can't remember. There's been so many of them, I can't remember. But he was one of the toughest kids around, and it wasn't very big, but I mean, he was just on that return team. I wish I could remember his name. I don't think Jack Williams is it, but it's close to that. But he was a mess.
What era was this from? You remember?
Well, let's see. This was Dr. Knight was a team physician, team orthopedist before Dr. Bowman. So it was a good while ago. It was probably in the 70s.
So you were. There was a time where you weren't just doing athletics. You were going to Redfern,
right,
in the mornings and working with students, and then in the afternoon going to
practice.
Going to practice. Can you just take me through your back then, like your normal day?
Well, I'd go to work at 8 o'clock and work at the Student Health Center all day, and then go to practice that afternoon. If the practice was early, I'd get off a little early, but take care of them, go to the training room. And in those days, by that time, my wife had already fed our children and everything, so I usually went down to the training table and ate with them and then went home.
And I guess it was being able to work with just normal students was probably a pretty cool thing.
I still do that. In fact, I'm working tomorrow. They ask me to come back in every once in a while and fill in when somebody's out or somebody's sick or somebody dies in the family, something like that. So I still work at the Student Health Center some, and it's a lot of fun. I don't need to do that. I just do it because I enjoy it, and 1 or 2 days a week is plenty in my age, but it's a lot of fun.
Now, for a long time, your office was and Clemson football has housed in McFadden and Jervey. Now, of course, it's over in the Palace over there. When you got your first look of the Reeves Center over there and everything that it has to offer, what was that like for you walking through and seeing all the things that?
Well, it's just such a dramatic change. When I first went to work in the training room, of course, there were no female trainers, and players walked around, naked and all that kind of stuff. So then when we got them, they had to be more discreet, and when we got the female trainers, and they were not nearly as big and strong, and the treatments actually were a little relatively primitive compared to what we have now. But you just had to work with what you had, and then the trainer, when the training room moved, it was a huge improvement as far as getting more room for other sports and things like that. It was a pretty good deal when the football players left, and then of course now the basketball players left and the baseball players left. So it's a lot more convenient and a lot easier for all the other athletes.
You mentioned, I guess back in the 80s, the medical community is trying to figure out ACLs, and sort of how to repair those. Now we're at the point where Amari Rogers suffers a torn ACL in March, I guess it was, and then is back in late September of the season. What have been, I guess, the biggest advances that have allowed for for that to sort of be figured out in some
Well,
cases?
they keep trying new techniques and doing new things, which have improved the recovery time tremendously, and they've learned the science of how strong the leg has to be, and how much time it takes for the ligament to heal, and all this just from experience and from sports medicine studies and scientific tests. But there's so much better now, what they have, the equipment they have, and the braces. We used to use cast, and now you don't ever see a cast, just a splint. It's just so different and so much better, and the recovery times are so much quicker.
The coaches say it's also dependent on the player and his determination and his ability to fight through. That makes a huge difference and if somebody's willing to work hard, like obviously Amari was, they get back a lot quicker. And it's a painful process. There's no getting around it. It's not much fun to rehab a ACL injury, and it's a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of stress, wondering if you're going to get back to your playing level, and it's pretty traumatic. But because of examples of like Amari's and Deshaun's and people that have recovered completely and done real well, it's not nearly as frightening as it used to be. When we first came, we didn't have an ACL repair. That a lot of times was the end of their career when I first started working. So it's dramatically better. You mentioned Deshaun. One of the memorable moments of his career here was when he, I guess, re-injured his knee against Georgia Tech, and then 2 weeks later played on a torn ACL against South Carolina and was a big factor in that game.
Some people criticize that, but if the ligament is torn, it can't. If you brace it and support it, it really can't get any worse. The ligament's got to be repaired, so there wasn't any problem in my mind with that. And obviously, it worked and panned out. Now, obviously, if that had been a head injury,
sure,
it probably would have been an entirely different scenario. But when you know something is really not going to get any worse, or the chances are very, very slim that it'll get worse, sometimes they're willing to take that chance. And you, as a physician, are willing to give them that chance.
What was that like, watching him run around there? And
that was fun, particularly because it was South Carolina. But he's a remarkable young man and very motivated and very strong in his value system. So you expected that he was going to do well.
I guess in that case, it's kind of up to the player.
Obviously, if he didn't want to play, he wouldn't have played. They no matter what, if they don't feel comfortable playing, you don't play them. That's never been a problem since I was at Clemson, and I'm sure it's never been since then. But most of them are so motivated, and if you explain the odds and the chances of thing happening, I mean, the worst that Deshaun probably could have happened, he might have torn a cartilage because his knee was loose or something, but that's nothing compared to an ACL. So that was a gutsy decision on his part.
And Taj Boyd, I think, played his entire senior year of high school on a torn ACL.
Yep. We've had people do that, go through the season. I remember back before we had such an easy repair of cartilages, when you had to open the knee to do it, we had one player that played almost the whole season with a torn cartilage. Every once in a while during the game, his knee would lock up, and he'd come over the sideline, and we'd jerk on it and put it back in place, and he'd go back in, and he played the whole season that way because that was just how motivated he was, and he wasn't going to get any worse. It was torn, so we let him do it and fixed it after the season. But fortunately, right after that, we got the arthroscopic repairs and all that, which were such a big improvement. One
of the sort of prominent injuries in the news right now is Tua Tagovailoa's high ankle sprain, that it's the other ankle from the one he underwent surgery on last year, but it's this, I forgot the term for the surgery. It's like a quick surgery.
That's as far as healing the high ankle sprain, that's a big improvement, I think, or it can be. I think time will tell whether that's a good way to do it or not, but so far it's worked out. But I saw how he got injured, and it doesn't look like it was just a high ankle sprain to me. So I'm not so sure he's going to come back as quick as maybe he did the last time, because I think it's a different injury. I think there's more than one injury in this. But just from looking at it on the field, so just from seeing the replay, so I don't know. We'll see how he does.
What did it look like to you? And you're just speculating, just based on what you saw. But what did you think?
It looked like he may have torn some of the regular lower ankle ligaments too. So, and a sprain is a tear. So some people get over sprains quicker than others. But we'll see how stable and how fixed this is. They know what they're doing down there, so I'm sure they're doing it right.
Yeah. So going back to last year, he suffered the ankle sprain in the SEC championship game against Georgia, has surgery, I guess, a couple of days later, and he had, I think, three weeks between then and the semifinal against Oklahoma. I'm just curious what you were, just given the newness of this particular surgery, what were your observations at the time? Were you kind of skeptical that he would be able to come back and be?
Actually, I was, yes. Did he have the mobility that he needed and all that? I was pretty surprised, and of course I don't know how much pain he had and what his pain tolerance is, but that depends on that too, and everybody's different on that level. But I was a little surprised, yes.
It's interesting, not to get too into the weeds of what Alabama's doing, but the philosophies of Dabo and Saban on player substitutions during games, and particularly in blowouts, is starkly different, because where Dabo, I mean, you'll see him pull the starters when they're up 30 or 35. At Alabama, they're up 30 on the last drive of the game against Texas A&M, and you see all their starting offense in, which is shocking to see because of what could happen.
Well, I mean, just statistically, being in a game, somebody's going to get hurt. And if you got a comfortable lead, it makes sense to me to get younger players a chance to play and save and lower the risk of your starters getting hurt. I mean, that's just, to me, common sense. And I certainly agree with Dabo's philosophy on that.
If you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit card processing company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com. Over the year we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer. It can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com.
Yeah, it's like he said, because you have fans who want to pile up the style points and beat everybody to a pulp. And Dabo said, the same people who want me to leave Trevor and Travis Etienne in games that are 45-0 are going to be the same people screaming at me if one of those guys rolls an ankle and are out for 3 weeks.
Exactly, and that's the way armchair coaches are. They think they have all the answers, and they don't have to deal with the real possibilities and the real problems like Dabo does. So I go with Dabo every time on that.
You mentioned sitting with with Trevor in the locker room last year, I guess, in the Syracuse game. What was that like?
Well, we watched the game on the monitor, and it was probably, in retrospect, probably unnecessary, but I enjoyed it. He's quite an entertaining guy, and it was a little bit of a precaution just to have somebody there in case something happened. But the odds were very slim that anything would happen, so it was enjoyable.
The first thing I thought after seeing that hit, and when you see the replays, is the guy, it looked like maybe a separated shoulder or something.
Well, I wasn't worried about that, and it's also a neck injury. Unfortunately, he didn't have either one of those.
It was all clear. That was almost seems almost miraculous, just given how hard that hit was.
Well, the neck injuries are the thing, other than concussions, that you worry about the most, obviously, and we've had several of those that were pretty brutal and pretty, some of them ended their careers and this, that, and other. But that's one of the few times that I ran out on the field without being called by the trainer, just when it would look like it possibly was a neck injury, and that's still the way it is. If you worry about that, you got to get out there and make sure things are done right. But we were very blessed on lots of occasions. Well, one time years ago, when we had JV football, we had a quarterback from Maryland, very highly rated guy, freshman, and he got a neck injury in a JV game down at Georgia, and it turned out to be serious enough that he was flown back to Johns Hopkins to have surgery, and his career was over. He never could play anymore. But those are very rare, fortunately, and then he was fine. He didn't have any paralysis or anything like that, but that was one of the scariest things ever.
The Cole Downer injury from back in, I think that was 2005, when he suffered a ruptured spleen during the game. I don't know if you have a recollection of that, but it was a really serious situation.
Well, fortunately, it wasn't. He didn't bleed that much. I mean, that can be a life-threatening injury pretty quickly, but it depends on how torn it is and how much bleeding you have and how quickly you bled out and everything. But that was one of the things that you worry a lot about when they get a hit in the stomach. For some reason, we don't see those as much anymore, the stomach injuries, I think because they don't let the players lower their heads and stick them, in there like they used to. And that was, fortunately, he was fine.
You mentioned that when you think a player could have a neck injury, there's things you do to, obviously, a checklist of things you do right away. Can you take us through that process of what you do?
Well, the first thing you want to do is find out whether they got a hit in the head or whether it was a neck or shoulder or what, and make sure it's a neck injury. And if it is, you go through all these questions about are you feeling any numbness anywhere and all this kind of stuff, and can you move everything and all this stuff. And then it's basically a precautionary thing. If it's any question, you just immobilize them and take them off the field and send them to the hospital or for an x-ray. But for x-rays and all that, it's a very detailed process, the way you take the helmet off and all this, that, and other. It's a pretty standard procedure. We have multiple people holding the neck still and all this kind of that stuff. It's just a routine thing that you hope you don't have to go through very often. And for some reason we haven't. One of the funniest things happened one time. It looked like a neck injury to this player, and I'm not going to name him, but I ran out on the field with Danny Poole, and because I thought it was a neck injury too, and it turned out he was lying there and said, I can't see. And Danny asked him, said, well, does your neck hurt? He said, no, but I can't see. And finally, Danny looked and said, well, how about open your eyes? And he opened his eyes and said, oh, I can't see. So obviously I'm not going to tell you who that was, but of course, if you're on TV and they see the trainers and the doctors laughing, they get upset. But those kind of things happen, and you're always glad to have something like that happen.
What's the scariest situation you think you've?
The scariest what?
The situation you think you've experienced?
That freshman quarterback from Maryland was the scariest and the most alarming. And I forget the running back. I think he was from Mississippi that hurt his neck and ended up having to quit playing.
I don't remember.
That was pretty scary because it was obvious that he had a fracture of his second. It turned out to be his second vertebra, which if it, had damaged his cord, he'd been a complete quadriplegic if he hadn't died. But I can't. Their names run together.
Sure.
I can't remember everybody's name.
Sure. I'm curious. As a team physician, you have to be objective. It's
well, you have to put the patient first. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Purely a clinical assessment, whereas a coach is by almost definition, he's not objective. His interest
coaches, fortunately, because I think of all the legal aspects of injuries and particularly with concussive injuries, I think the coaches are definitely much more willing to accept medical judgments than they were when I first started. Let's just put it that way. And that's a good thing, obviously. It's and I think all coaches, nobody wants to be the coach to play somebody that goes back in and has a significant injury that could have been avoided if he hadn't gone back in.
I recall C.J. Spiller in 2009. I think he played that whole season with, it was turf toe, definitely, I think, and then maybe an ankle injury too. A lot of that stuff is not really, it's kind of kept under wraps because you don't want people going after an injury. And I think at that time, people really, in the moment, people on the outside didn't know the extent of what he was going through. Do you remember that? That season?
Actually, I wasn't involved much in that, so I can't really comment on that.
Gotcha.
I knew he was hurt, but I didn't. I mean, I knew what was wrong just because I was around when he was examined and things like that. But how much pain he was having and all that, I wasn't involved with that.
Do you still do you travel with the team?
Do what?
Do you still travel with the team at all?
No,
not at all.
No, the doctor. It takes its toll on you.
Yeah.
I basically would just be in the way because other people taking care of everything. Even Dr. Bowman has started not traveling anymore. Dr. Martin goes. Steve Martin has taken his place, and getting back at 4 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, it takes its toll on you, and as does age.
So home games, where are you?
I usually just go stand on the sidelines and mainly I go because I like to hear the talks and interact with other doctors, just kind of keep up with what's going on. And sometimes we talk about new procedures that people are trying, that kind of thing. And it's just keeping your mind going is more than anything else.
You mentioned these talks. You want to hear, you talking about the locker room speeches?
Yeah.
And I want to hear some. I want to hear some. What are the more memorable or rousing, I guess, pregame that you can recall?
Well, some of them are memorable that they can't really be repeated. And those are sometimes the best ones. But let me think. They're hard. It's hard to say. Every coach is different, and they use different motivations and different things. But the most striking thing about Dabo is how honest he is and how he treats everybody pretty much the same. He'll call out, the biggest star we have if they do something wrong, but yet it's for their good, and to make them be better. And I can't really. It's just the way he talks, even the prayers he gives after the game for the player that was hurt in the game on the other team, and all this kind of stuff. It's just good to hear that kind of talk, and those. It's good for the players to hear it. I enjoy it, but I mean it's much more important for the players to hear that and know that it is a game, and you want to be a good sport, and you want to be a good person, and I think we're in a good place right now with that.
Have you ever walked out of the locker room after the pregame speech, and because of the speech, because of what you heard, said, "We're going to destroy this team"?
Oh yeah, sometimes you get a feeling for that, and sometimes you say, you can feel the energy and the drive and the excitement and everything, and then sometimes you go out worried to death because maybe the talk kind of fell flat, or you could just sense that they were overconfident or something like that. It's just being around them, and it's just a kind of a hunch type thing. But a lot of times you're right that if you feel like that maybe they are not fired up and they're not going to play their best, and that's what happens. And then of course there are other times where that the energy and all is there, but for some reason it doesn't work out. But those are few and far between. You usually can get a good sense after you hear the talks at pregame talk and the halftime talk about how it's going to go the rest of the game.
Were you in there for the pregame before the recent Florida State game?
Yes.
Did you go out of there thinking, okay, we're going to destroy these guys?
Yes. I felt we were going to do real well.
It felt like they were angry.
They were motivated, yes, they were. They knew that they had probably not performed like they should have before, and they wanted to go out and prove themselves.
It seems like Dabo has such a good sort of finger on the pulse of what his players need to hear in terms of knowing when to back off some. The one example that comes to mind is Syracuse last year when Trevor was hurt. But beyond that, Kelly Bryant had left the team.
Trevor was hurt.
Who did I say?
Dabo.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Dabo was healthy, as far as I know. Trevor was hurt, and beyond that, there was this traumatic event that had occurred earlier in the week when Kelly left the team, and so the players who were there have said that he was very calm and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to run the ball.
There wasn't any panic.
Yeah.
There was a feeling that just had a job to do, and everybody wanted to put their best effort into doing it, and I think that's why it worked out.
That seems like a hard and complicated thing to know how to do, to have a grasp of the psychology of your team, and then to address your team based on whatever the mood is. Does Dabo maybe have the best touch with that?
I think so. The best that I've seen, and I pretty much was in most of the locker rooms. I missed a couple, like when my daughter got married and things like that, but pretty much for 33 years I was in all the locker rooms, and I think he's by far the best I've been around.
As a Clemson person, as somebody who's been around here for a long time, what was it like for the 2 decades from the late 80s until around 2011, when Clemson is just wandering around in the wilderness in football? What was that like?
You could sense that the things just weren't they weren't clicking, they weren't organized. I mean, organization and details being taken care of just weren't there, and enthusiasm even on part of some of the coaches I thought was lacking. There's certainly no lack of enthusiasm now, and that makes a difference. I think it's contagious, and the players know they've been prepared. And we have great assistant coaches, I think, and the relationship with the players and the assistant coaches is better than I think it's ever been. And I think that's one reason for our success, obviously, that they trust them, they like them, they respect them, and they want to please them, so they do the right thing, and it pays off.
And beyond that, it seems like everybody is on the same page from the coach to the athletic director to the president to the trustees, whereas that was all disjointed in the past, it seems like, regarding how good they wanted football really to be, based on, I guess, some of the stuff that happened in the 80s.
Well, I think there was probably some of that, but I think it's awfully easy to go along with Dabo. He's so convincing. He, you hear these people say, well, if they get him up here and he talks to their mothers, that we're going to sign him, that kind of thing, because he just comes across as being the person that's going to take good care of the child and this, that, and the other. And I think the trustees and the president and everybody else know that we're in that situation, and it's a lot easier to be agreeable and everything when everybody's on the same page as far as the coach that represents us, and that's the way it is.
Let's go back to, say, 2007, when winning 10 games seemed like a pipe dream, seemed like it was never going to happen. What were you thinking at that time? Was your mindset, we can get back to where we were, or were you thinking, I don't know if it'll ever happen again in terms of national championship?
Tell you the truth, I didn't have a lot of faith in the coaches that we had during that period. It just didn't seem to be clicking. And that's from a pretty naive person on the technical aspects of football. I mean, I don't know anything about designing a play or anything like that, or what everybody's supposed to do. I'm just not oriented to that. But you just knew things weren't right, and you just don't have that feeling now. You feel like everybody's on the same page, which wasn't the case in the past.
So it was a cultural thing that you noticed.
Yes, yeah.
Just something
cultural and confidence. The confidence is there now. I think because Dabo's so confident, his coaches are so confident, that it wears off on the players. But that just wasn't there in those days.
And what was amazing was his first week on the job as an interim coach. He's telling students to come to practice. He's going and talking to faculty, trying to rebuild those bridges, and that's.
Oh, it's unbelievable. To think that a head coach would show up in a class of yours and listen to the professor for an hour. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And he just knows how to do the right thing. That example I told you about, how he was teaching his children to appreciate somebody working in the churchyard. There's something as simple as that he wanted them to know that somebody's putting in time and effort, and they would appreciate a thank you. I mean, that's just the way he is. He's just that kind of a person. And, of course, his wife is, too. She's delightful and engaging, and they are just a perfect fit.
At the Texas A&M game in College Station last year, I'm in the press box just doing my normal thing, and here comes Doc Bowman plopping down right beside me. He's the ACC observer of officials.
I did that for a year, too.
Can you explain to me, like, what the finer points of what that's all about and what the purpose is?
Well, I thought it was kind of a waste myself. I don't know whether they still even do that or not. I guess they do. The only time I really felt the year I did it that something might have happened that they didn't know about was when Mike Williams ran into the goalpost. because I had a real good view from where I was seated up in the stands that I thought he had a neck injury. And about the time as I reached for my phone to call Danny, I saw Danny and everybody running out there. So I think they realized, but there was a lag period there when I don't think anybody realized that he'd been hurt that seriously. But that was the only time that I felt that whole year I did it that I could have contributed something, and that would just been a few seconds difference, really. And they're so aware of what's going on and everything down on the field. And, of course, the players that are out there are a big help, because if they think there's something terrible wrong, they'll call the trainer out there right away. Now, the other side to that is sometimes it's an injury and the players go there and try to pick them up or something, and they shouldn't. And that's when you really worry. But usually if the player's down and out, the other players realize the seriousness of it.
Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183, or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com.
So what do you, when you did that for a season, tell me about, like, okay, you go up to, you have a seat in the press box and you just watch the game, and then
right.
what? Like,
and
so
it was enjoyable. It's, a lot of times you were with the observer from the other team, and one time the retired Georgia Tech team physician and I sat together and right next to each other and watched the game, and we had a lot of fun interacting and that kind of thing. Sometimes you're stuck up there all by yourself. You didn't know anybody, and it really, to tell you the truth, it wasn't very enjoyable. I'd much rather have been down in the locker room hearing the talks and interacting, with the other doctors and stuff. But it was an experience, and that's.
And so basically,
I really think it was an overreaction to injuries that they thought might help, and I haven't heard of any real examples where it made a big difference, to tell you the truth. But I just may be out of the loop.
So basically, you were there to spot something that they didn't see.
They didn't see.
And how many times did you see something that they
Well,
didn't?
see, that's what I said. There's only the one time when Mike Williams.
Oh, so you were the observer that year? Mm-hmm. Okay, I thought you were in the stands. I'm sorry.
No, I was up in the
box.
Yeah.
Okay, so that actually was.
That's about the only time that I really thought, if they hadn't, I don't know whether other players called them out there or what, but by the time I could reach to the phone to call Danny and tell him it might be a serious injury, they were already on the way out there. So,
what's your proudest moment, I guess, of this recent Dabo era of brilliance that you've experienced, just behind the scenes?
I've never been through a national championship celebration. When we had the one in 1981, if you remember, Deshaun had heat exhaustion and
Homer Jordan
pretty much collapsed. Jordan, excuse me. And we had, we had trouble even feeling a pulse. We had to put IVs in both arms, and he was pretty close to having a heat stroke. And people don't realize how hot it was in that game and how. So I didn't get to enjoy the celebration then. And then the last two games, I've gone down to Florida and watched the game with a friend who can't go to games anymore, and because my wife had gone to New York both those times for a meeting that just happened to be the same time, and I just figured I'd be in the way if I was down there. So I went and watched it with my friend. So I haven't really gotten to enjoy that, but those certainly would have been memorable. And there's some games that were memorable, just when we weren't expected to win and things like that. It's just been a lot of fun, and see how excited they are. One thing about that I quickly realized that the players on the other teams hurt just as much as our guys when they lost, and they celebrated just as much as they win. And I find it hard to have any animosity toward any team or any players or anything, because those guys are working just as hard to try to do the best they can. And I didn't feel that way when I was pretty much one-sided when I first started, but after a while you mellow a little bit, and I realized that, those are somebody's children just doing their best, and you can't get. I don't like this business of making things personal or anything like that. It's just, and I even pull for South Carolina on occasion, because I think it'd be better if it was more competitive and they were doing better. And those kids on that team worked real hard. I was tickled to death to see them beat Georgia the other day, because they want some reward for their efforts too.
Do you remember when this shift occurred and you started taking sort of a more intellectual view of it?
It was just gradual, because I was a rabid fan when I first started and wanted us to win everything in all sports and do all this, and it just kind of, you just find it. And sometimes, when I'd be with basketball and the other team didn't have a doctor, and I looked at their players and that kind of stuff, you realize, they're just kids trying to do their best, and you want to, do what you can to make sure they're safe and help them. But I'm not nearly as radical about it as a lot of people.
Do you, so the Homer Jordan story, y'all are at the Orange Bowl. Are y'all just in a separate room with him trying to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but it was at the Orange Bowl?
A little training room. Dr. Hare and Dr. Knight and I were doing our best to packed him in ice and all that. I mean, he was close to having a heat stroke.
Wow. That's, and so then the not being able to watch or be at the two recent championships was, after they won it, is it hard to just sort of turn the TV off? Oh,
yeah, you had trouble going to sleep.
Yeah.
You're so excited for them and everything. It's just been a tremendous experience watching this program develop to where it is.
And it seems like there's no end in sight.
I hope not. I'm still a fan, and I hadn't mellowed that much. I wants to do well and win, but like he says, the fun's in the winning, and it's a lot more fun. It's been some pretty miserable locker rooms I've been in. And
what's the most miserable?
Gosh, I don't know. It's pretty miserable to lose to South Carolina any time, and then when they had that period of losing, and a couple of games in there, you felt like we should have won. That's pretty rough. That's probably been about as low as it gets, really.
Anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to cover?
Not that I can think of. It's just been a wonderful experience. I had a great time doing it, and hopefully helped people and took care of them right, and had a great life.
Well, thank you for your time, and also thank you for all your philanthropy in the community, and also Mickey as well, and great members of the Clemson community.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks to Doc Harder for joining us earlier today. Some really interesting behind-the-scenes stories there, so appreciate him joining us. Appreciate our sponsors, including our title sponsor, Parham Smith & Archental Law Firm. Most of all, thanks to all of you for making this a part of your routine. We'll be back next week. Everybody have a great rest of the week and weekend. Stay safe. Cheers.